The door was already closing when Ethan Cole realized something was wrong. The heavy metal panels sliding together with a deep grinding sound that echoed through the chamber. Red warning lights flashing slowly across the curved walls, and the air inside feeling colder than it should have been. He stood alone in Sector 7, his first real assignment at the base, and on the other side of the wide circular room, behind a transparent field of blue energy, something moved in the shadows. He had been told the chamber would be empty during orientation. He had been told this was just observation duty, simple, quiet, routine, but the shape inside the field slowly rose to its full height, and two glowing eyes opened in the darkness. 12 hours earlier, Ethan had arrived at the remote planetary base with excitement in his chest and nervous energy in his hands. He was only 22, fresh out of training, assigned to humanity's most advanced deep space military station orbiting a distant colony world. He expected guard duty at a hangar or supply deck, maybe patrol shifts with senior soldiers. Instead, he was called into a narrow office where Commander Hayes studied him with a strange expression. "Private Cole, you're first. Assignment will be in Sector 7, night observation, alone," the commander had said, sliding a thin data pad across the desk. Ethan noticed how two officers standing near the door avoided looking at him. Their faces tight, their posture stiff, as if they wanted to warn him but could not. Sector 7 was not marked on the public station map. Ethan had to use a restricted elevator to reach it. The hallway leading to the chamber was silent and empty, the lights dimmer than the rest of the base. He asked the escorting sergeant what exactly he would be observing. The sergeant paused before answering. "Just watch and report. Do not speak. Do not approach the containment field. And if she stands, do not make eye contact." That last instruction stayed in Ethan's mind like a weight. If she stands, he wanted to ask who she was, but the sergeant had already turned away, leaving him alone at the massive sealed door. Back in the present, Ethan swallowed as the figure stepped fully into the soft red light. She was taller than any human, her posture straight and calm, long dark limbs moving with quiet control. Faint glowing lines ran across her skin like living patterns of light, shifting slowly as if responding to her thoughts. She did not look like a wild creature. She looked royal, powerful, almost elegant. This was not what he expected from the word alien. He had grown up hearing stories about monsters. From the First Contact War, about violent creatures that destroyed cities and attacked colonies. But the being in front of him did not look violent. She looked aware. The blue energy field around her hummed softly, separating them by only a few meters. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly, remembering the rules. Observe only, no interaction. The room was wide and circular, filled with scanning equipment and silent cameras mounted high on walls. Every movement was recorded, every sound tracked. He told himself this was safe. The field was strong. The military would not risk something dangerous on a rookie's first night. Still, the way she watched him made his skin feel tight, her glowing eyes studying him carefully, not with rage, but with curiosity. Minutes passed in heavy silence. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, trying not to stare, but it was impossible not to look. She moved closer to the energy barrier, stopping just inches from it. The blue light casting soft reflections across her face. He noticed details now, fine ridges along her cheekbones, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the faint pulse of light under her skin. She raised one hand slowly and placed it against the barrier. The energy flared gently where her fingers touched, and Ethan felt something strange, a pressure in his head, light at first, like a distant echo. "You are afraid," a calm voice said inside his mind. Ethan's heart slammed against his chest. He did not hear the words with his ears. The chamber remained silent, but the voice was clear, smooth, controlled. He stumbled back one step, almost breaking protocol, scanning the room for hidden speakers. But he knew it was not coming from the walls. It was coming from her. She tilted her head slightly, observing his reaction, and the glowing patterns on her skin shifted brighter for a moment. He remembered the file briefing he skimmed before entering. Subject designation: Alien Queen, last surviving royal of her species. Captured during final phase of First Contact conflict. High intelligence confirmed. Telepathic capability suspected, but unproven. Ethan had not believed that part. It sounded like science fiction exaggeration. But now the truth stood in front of him, speaking without sound. "I will not harm you." The voice returned gently. "You are not my enemy." His throat felt dry. He wanted to respond, to ask questions, to demand answers, but orders were clear. No communication. He clenched his fists at his sides, trying to stay focused. The cameras were watching. Command was likely monitoring everything. And yet something about the way she spoke did not feel hostile. It felt patient, almost sad. The station lights flickered suddenly. Just for a second, the blue energy barrier dimming before stabilizing again. Warning icons flashed briefly on the side monitors. Ethan looked up at the system display. A small power fluctuation warning appeared and disappeared. Probably nothing, he told himself. This base was old in some sectors. Small glitches happen all the time. But when he looked back at her, she was smiling faintly. "The war is not over," her voice whispered in his mind, softer now. "And they have not told you the truth." Somewhere deep in the base, a distant metallic thud echoed through the structure. Too heavy to be normal operations, Ethan felt the vibration under his boots. The red lights around the chamber began flashing faster. And for the first time since entering Sector 7, he realized this was not routine observation. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something he was never prepared for. And as he stood there alone with the alien queen, watching him through the fading blue glow, understood one simple fact: his first assignment was not a test of skill. It was a test of choice, and whatever happened next would change far more than just his career. If you enjoy stories like this and want to see what happens next, consider subscribing to the channel so you do not miss the next part of this journey. The red lights continued to pulse across the curved walls of Sector 7, casting long shadows that moved slowly behind the transparent energy barrier. Ethan Cole forced himself to steady his breathing, telling himself that what had just happened was stress, imagination, exhaustion from his first day. But deep down he knew the voice had been real. The words had not echoed through speakers or hidden transmitters. They had formed directly inside his thoughts, calm and controlled, and the being, standing behind the blue field, watched him with quiet patience, as if she understood the storm inside his mind. The alien queen stepped closer to the barrier, the glow beneath her skin becoming slightly brighter, thin lines of light tracing across her arms and neck like living circuits. She did not move like a prisoner. She moved like someone who owned a room, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. There was no panic in her eyes, no anger, only a deep awareness that made Ethan feel exposed. He suddenly understood why the soldiers outside avoided speaking about Sector 7, why no one wanted eye contact before sending him down here. This was not just containment duty. This was something much more dangerous. "You were wondering if you were safe." Her voice entered his mind again, smooth and steady, without emotion but not without meaning. Ethan stiffened, keeping his face neutral for the cameras mounted high above. He remembered the instructions clearly. Do not respond, do not acknowledge, do not engage. But how was he supposed to ignore a voice inside his own head? His training never covered telepathic contact. No manual explained what to do when the prisoner could read your fear without a single word spoken. He tried to focus on something simple, counting his breaths, studying the blinking system panels on the wall, anything to push her presence out of his thoughts. The large chamber was colder now, or maybe it only felt that way. The containment field hummed softly, a steady blue glow forming a curved wall between them. Faint energy sparks flickered where the field connected to the floor and ceiling, reinforcing the illusion of safety. Ethan stepped sideways slightly, pretending to check a console, but in truth he needed distance from her eyes, because every time he looked at her, he felt like she could see not just his face, but his memories, his doubts, even his past. "You are young," she said gently inside his mind. "This is your first command assignment." His stomach tightened. That information was not public. He had barely arrived at the base that morning. Only command staff had access to personal files, and even they would not discuss it openly near a prisoner. He realized with growing unease that she was not guessing. She was reading, scanning surface thoughts with quiet ease. The possibility terrified him more than claws or weapons ever could. because this meant the energy field was not blocking everything. Ethan glanced at the system display mounted near the entrance. Scanning for irregularities, the containment levels appeared stable, power output at 98%, no visible breach, and yet the lights above flickered again, just briefly. A tiny dip in brightness that lasted less than a second. He felt the vibration under his boots once more, stronger this time. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to make him wonder what was happening beyond Sector 7. "You feel it," the Queen continued, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "They are close." The words sent a cold wave through his chest. He wanted to demand who she meant, who was close, what threat was approaching, but he remained silent, reminding himself that engaging could compromise the mission. Though the mission itself was beginning to feel unclear, he had not been told why she was kept alive, why a captured alien royal was preserved instead of eliminated. The official report said she was too valuable for study. But now, standing face to face with her, Ethan sensed there was another reason. She slowly lifted her hand again and pressed her palm against the barrier, the blue energy brightening around her fingers, a faint crackling sound filling the air. And for a brief moment Ethan felt a sharp pulse in his head, stronger than before, not painful, but intense like static electricity across his thoughts. Images flashed in his mind that were not his own, dark space filled with massive shapes moving silently. Fleets of unfamiliar alien ships forming in the void, cold stars reflecting off metallic hulls that did not match her species' design. He staggered half a step back, gripping the edge of a console to steady himself. The images faded as quickly as they came, leaving his heart racing and his hands slightly shaking. The Queen lowered her hand slowly, watching him carefully. "Now you understand," she whispered inside his mind. "I did not start your war, I ended it, and there are others who did not agree with my choice." A sudden sharp tone echoed through the chamber, the first real alarm of the night, small at first, just a single warning chime from the overhead system. Ethan's eyes snapped toward the wall display, where a yellow notification blinked urgently. External sensor disturbance detected. Unidentified objects entering outer perimeter range. His pulse quickened as the status line updated in real time. Long-range scanners attempting to identify incoming signatures. Command authorization pending. The Queen did not look surprised. Instead, her expression hardened slightly, the glowing patterns under her skin shifting to a deeper shade of blue. "They followed me," she said calmly. "They always do." Another vibration shook the chamber, stronger now, dust particles drifting down from the ceiling vents, the red lights switching from slow pulse to rapid flash. And for the first time since stepping into Sector 7, Ethan realized that he was not here simply to observe a prisoner. He was here because Command expected something to happen, something connected directly to her presence, something they were not ready to explain to a rookie soldier. The containment field flickered again, longer this time, the hum dipping lower before stabilizing. Ethan's training finally pushed him into motion. He activated his wrist communicator, attempting to reach Central Command, but static filled the channel, broken signals and half-formed voices cutting in and out. Whatever was happening outside was interfering with internal systems, and Sector 7 suddenly felt very small. Across the barrier, the alien Queen stepped closer still, her face now only inches away from the shimmering blue light, her eyes locked onto his with steady intensity. "You were sent here because they do not trust me," she said softly inside his mind. "But they should be afraid of what is coming, not of me." The chamber lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness for a full second before emergency backup systems engaged, casting everything in deep red glow. The barrier's hum weakened briefly, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Ethan felt the air pressure shift around him, heavy and charged, and somewhere far above the base structure, a distant explosion echoed through the metal corridors. For a long moment, neither of them moved, soldier and Queen separated by thinning energy and fading certainty. And in that silent red light, Ethan understood one terrifying truth. Whatever was approaching the base was not random. It was precise, deliberate, and connected directly to the being standing before him, watching him not as prey, but as the only human in the room who might still have a choice. The vibration from the distant explosion did not fade this time. It rolled through the metal structure of the base like a slow wave, making the floor under Ethan's boots tremble again. The red emergency lights painted everything in a warning glow, and the containment barrier between him and the alien queen shimmered, as if it were breathing. He tightened his grip on his weapon, but did not raise it, because deep down he knew that if she wanted to cross that space, the weapon in his hands would mean nothing. The alarm system activated fully now, a deeper siren echoing through hidden speakers, and a message flashed across the wall display near the entrance. Outer defense grid engaged, unidentified fleet entering combat range. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. This was no training drill. The base was under real threat, and yet no clear orders were reaching Sector 7. His communicator continued to spit static, cutting off before any full command could be understood. It felt as if this entire section of the station had been isolated on purpose. You see now, the Queen's voice entered his mind again, steady despite the chaos. They did not tell you the truth because they feared you would ask questions. Ethan swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. What truth? What questions? He remembered the restricted file he had opened earlier in the day, just before his shift began, curiosity pushing him to access deeper records about Sector 7. Most of the files were locked behind high-level clearance, but one fragment had been visible long enough for him to read it. Subject surrendered voluntarily. Ceasefire proposal initiated by alien royal authority. Negotiation attempt denied by Earth High Command. Detention ordered immediately. At the time he thought it was a translation error, a misfiled report from early war confusion. But now, standing face to face with her while enemy ships approached the base, that line echoed in his mind with new meaning. Surrender voluntarily. Ceasefire proposal denied. The war ended because I ordered it to end, she continued calmly, her glowing markings pulsing faintly. Your leaders called it victory, but it was not victory, it was my decision. Another impact rocked the base, closer this time. A loud metallic crash followed by the distant sound of decompression alarmed somewhere in the station. Ethan felt the air pressure fluctuate slightly before stabilizing. Emergency bulkheads were sealing damaged sections. People were running through corridors above them, shouting orders. But here in Sector 7, he stood in a strange calm at the center of something much larger. You attacked our border worlds, she said inside his thoughts. And for the first time, there was a hint of emotion beneath her controlled tone. Not anger, but memory. We responded as any empire would, but I saw what your kind was capable of. I saw how quickly you adapt, how fiercely you survive, and I chose to stop the conflict before it consumed both our species. Ethan's mind struggled to process her words. All his life he had been taught that humanity fought bravely against an unprovoked alien invasion, that the first contact war was a desperate defense against extinction. He had seen documentaries showing burning cities and fallen soldiers, heroic commanders standing against impossible odds. But no one ever mentioned surrender from the alien side. No one ever mentioned peace offers. They feared what peace would mean, she continued, stepping closer to the barrier as sparks danced briefly across its surface. If your people learned that I chose negotiation, they would question why your leaders continued preparing for war. Fear is easier to control than understanding. A new warning appeared on the display. Outer defense satellites destroyed. Multiple hostile vessels entering low orbit. Ethan felt his throat tighten. This was not a small raid. This was an organized strike, precise and focused. And suddenly he understood why this base existed in such secrecy. Why Sector 7 was hidden. The alien queen was not just a prisoner for study. She was leverage, insurance, perhaps even bait. They are not my people, she said before he could form the thought fully. The fleet above us belongs to a rival faction. They rejected my command to end the war. They see peace as weakness. The containment barrier flickered again, longer this time, the hum dropping to a low, unstable tone. Ethan's training told him to report containment instability immediately, but there was no one responding on his channel. The rest of the base was fighting for survival, and Sector 7 had become the quiet center of storm. I was captured after I signaled surrender, she said, her eyes locking onto his. "Your commanders feared I would influence your world if I spoke publicly. So they imprisoned me in secret. They study my biology, my neural patterns, my language, but they never allowed me to address your people." Another explosion shook the chamber, closer and more violent, dust falling from the ceiling panels, small cracks forming along the far wall. Ethan realized with growing dread that the attackers were not firing randomly. Their strikes were moving inward, targeting key systems, moving toward this sector, toward her. "They are coming for me," she said quietly. "If they reclaim me, they will not offer peace again." The lights dimmed sharply as power levels dropped. Backup generators activating with a low rumble beneath the floor. The containment field shimmered wildly for a moment, its surface rippling like liquid under stress. Ethan felt his heartbeat match the unstable hum of the barrier. If it failed completely, she would be free, and he would be the only armed human in the room. But something inside him had shifted. The simple image of enemy and hero no longer fit. The story he had been taught felt incomplete, and the fear in his chest was no longer just fear of her. It was fear of the truth, fear that humanity's leaders had chosen secrecy over peace, fear that this entire attack was the result of that decision. The Queen raised her hand once more, not to strike, but to show him something. A wave of images flooded his mind again, clearer this time. Massive alien ships surrounding a royal flagship, heated debate inside a grand chamber filled with beings similar to her but more aggressive in posture, her voice commanding them to stand down, to seek negotiation, and others rising in fury, accusing her of betrayal, of weakness, of abandoning dominance. The vision shifted to her ship surrounded by human vessels, weapons locked, her shields lowered in surrender, and then darkness as she was taken into custody. The images faded, leaving Ethan breathing hard, sweat forming at his temple despite the cold air. He knew those memories were not fabricated. They carried emotional weight too heavy to be illusion. And as another distant blast echoed through the base, he realized that the truth had been buried not to protect humanity, but to protect power. A final alarm blared. Louder than the others, sector breach detected, hostile units entering lower decks, estimated arrival to Sector 7, 3 minutes. Ethan looked from the flashing warning display back to the alien queen standing inside the weakening field. And for the first time, he did not see a monster. He saw a leader who had tried to prevent this very moment. And now the enemy she once commanded was coming to erase her and anyone who stood in their way. The countdown on the wall display dropped from 3 minutes to 2 minutes and 40 seconds, each second blinking in sharp red digits. And the entire chamber shook again as another explosion tore through a nearby section of the base. This time the vibration was violent enough to send a metal tool tray sliding across the floor, crashing into the curved wall with a sharp clang. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle, his pulse racing. The sirens now screaming without pause. Emergency systems, overriding normal operations, and somewhere beyond the sealed doors of Sector 7, the sounds of gunfire echoed faintly through the corridors. The containment barrier flickered harder now, the blue energy thinning and reforming in uneven waves, sparks snapping at the points where connected to the floor, the steady hum becoming an unstable buzz. Ethan's training told him that if the field collapsed fully, automated defense turrets would activate, but when he glanced toward the ceiling mounts, he saw only dark, inactive metal. Power was being redirected to outer defenses, leaving Sector 7 vulnerable. "They are closer than you think," the Queen said calmly inside his mind, though her glowing markings had shifted to a deeper, more intense shade, the patterns moving faster beneath her skin. "Your defenses are strong, but they are not prepared for this type of assault." As if to confirm her words, a violent blast struck somewhere just beyond the chamber entrance. The thick metal door buckling inward slightly with a heavy impact, dust falling from the ceiling panels, and the timer on the display suddenly vanished, replaced by a flashing message: perimeter breach, hostile life forms detected inside lower deck corridors. Ethan's mouth went dry. The enemy was already inside the base, moving toward this sector with purpose. Not random destruction, not chaos, but a focused advance. He stepped backward toward the main control console for the containment system. scanning for manual override options. But most controls were locked behind command authorization codes he did not possess. The base command structure was collapsing, and Sector 7 had been left to a rookie soldier and a captive alien queen. Another shock wave slammed into the door, this one powerful enough to split a seam along its edge. A thin crack of darkness appearing where the metal had warped. Ethan raised his weapon instinctively, aiming at the entrance, his breath shallow, the chamber lights flickering wildly. And at that exact moment, the containment field let out a sharp, high-pitched whine. The blue barrier flashed white, and then went completely dark. Silence filled the chamber for one long second. The space between Ethan and the Queen was now empty air. She stepped forward out of the space where the field had been, free for the first time since her capture, her movements calm and controlled. No rush, no sudden attack, just quiet purpose. Ethan's rifle was trained directly at her chest, his finger resting against the trigger, every lesson from his training screaming at him to fire before she could move. But she did not move toward him. She walked past him, close enough that he felt the faint warmth radiating from her glowing skin, close enough to see the fine details of her expression. Not anger, not revenge, but focus. She stopped only a few steps ahead, turning slightly to look at him over her shoulder. "If I wished you dead, you would already be gone," her voice said gently inside his mind, not as a threat, but as a simple fact. Before he could respond, the main door to Sector 7 exploded inward in a violent burst of twisted metal and smoke, the shock wave knocking Ethan backward onto one knee, his ears ringing, sparks flying from damaged wall panels, and through the smoke stepped figures that made even the Queen's presence seem calm by comparison. They were tall and armored in dark organic plating, their bodies shaped like twisted hybrids of insect and machine, multiple jointed limbs moving with unnatural speed, glowing red eyes scanning the room instantly. Their weapons were not rifles, but mounted energy emitters integrated directly into their arms, humming with destructive power. These were not soldiers of diplomacy. These were executioners. Ethan fired first, instinct taking over as he squeezed the trigger, his rifle releasing a burst of blue plasma that struck the nearest invader in the torso, the impact pushing it back a step but not stopping it. The alien let out a sharp metallic screech and returned fire, a blast of red energy slamming into the wall behind Ethan, melting metal like paper. He rolled to the side, taking cover behind a damaged console as debris scattered across the floor. The Queen moved differently. She did not dive for cover. She stepped forward toward the attackers, raising one glowing hand, and the air around her seemed to ripple, a wave of invisible force surging outward from her body. The nearest alien was thrown violently backward into the broken doorway, its armor cracking under the impact. The second creature fired again, but the blast curved slightly off target as if pushed aside by unseen pressure. "She is priority target," one of the invaders transmitted in a harsh, distorted language, the sound translated roughly through the base's damaged system speakers. "Royal subject must be secured." So it was true. They were not here for destruction alone. They were here for her. More of the armored figures rushed into the chamber, moving with terrifying coordination, spreading out to block exits and control angles. Ethan realized they were not trying to kill him unless necessary. Their focus was entirely on the Queen. Two of them launched forward with mechanical speed, attempting to surround her, but she reacted instantly, her glowing patterns flaring bright white for a split second. The floor beneath the attackers cracked as a shockwave burst outward from her position, lifting both aliens off their feet and slamming them into opposite walls. One of them fell motionless, the other struggling to rise with damaged limbs. Ethan stared in shock at the raw power she displayed. This was not a helpless prisoner. This was a battlefield leader. Another explosion rocked the base, this one much closer, the ceiling panels in Sector 7 partially collapsing at the far end, smoke pouring in from damaged ventilation shafts, emergency lights flickering erratically. The entire structure felt unstable, like it could tear itself apart at any moment. "Your base is falling," the Queen said sharply in his mind, her calm tone replaced with urgency for the first time. "They will overload your reactor to eliminate all evidence, including me." Ethan's eyes widened. If the reactor was destroyed, the entire lower deck would be vaporized. Thousands of personnel, still fighting above them, would have no chance. This was not a simple rescue mission for the rival faction. This was erasure. Another wave of enemy troops advanced through the smoke, their red optics locking onto the Queen, energy weapons charging brighter. Ethan pushed himself to his feet and moved beside her without fully realizing he had chosen a side, firing controlled bursts at the nearest attackers, forcing them to take cover behind twisted metal debris. For a brief moment, soldier and alien Queen stood back to back in the center of the ruined chamber, surrounded by smoke, sparks, and incoming fire. And in that burning chaos, Ethan understood something with complete clarity. The story he had been told about enemies and monsters had shattered, replaced by a far more complicated truth. And if he wanted to survive this night, if he wanted the base to survive, he would have to trust the very being he was assigned to guard. Smoke filled what remained of Sector 7, thick and bitter, mixing with the sharp smell of burned metal and melted wiring. Sparks rained from the ceiling like orange fireflies, and the once secure chamber now looked like the center of a battlefield. Ethan stood beside the alien Queen with his rifle raised, breathing hard, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. And for a brief second, there was a strange silence between waves of attack, a pause that felt too thin to trust. Two fallen invaders lay near the broken doorway, their dark armor cracked and smoking, but distant footsteps echoed through the corridor beyond. More of them were coming, organized and relentless. They were not retreating. They were adapting. Ethan quickly checked his weapon's charge level. Less than half remaining. He glanced sideways at the Queen, unsure she would turn on him now that the containment field was gone. Unsure if she even needed him. She looked down at him briefly, her glowing eyes steady. "You have chosen." Her voice entered his mind, not as a question, but as recognition. "I chose to survive," he muttered under his breath, though he knew she could hear the thought anyway. A violent tremor shook the floor again, stronger than before. Emergency lights along the wall went dark completely, leaving only the faint glow from her skin and the distant flicker of burning circuits to illuminate the chamber. Somewhere above them, a loud metallic roar echoed through the structure, followed by a deep mechanical groan. The base was losing structural stability. "They're moving toward your reactor core," she said quickly, her gaze shifting toward the corridor. "They will destroy it to prevent your command from reclaiming me." Ethan's stomach tightened. If the reactor went critical, not only would this base be lost, but debris could fall toward the colony planet below. Millions of civilians depending on the orbital shield grid power by the station. This was bigger than military secrets now. This was survival for everyone. Another wave of armored attackers entered through the shattered doorway, their red optics scanning, weapons charging with rising hums. Ethan fired first again, controlled bursts forcing them to scatter behind twisted support beams. But they moved with precision, flanking positions, trying to isolate the Queen from him. She stepped forward instead of retreating, raising both hands this time, and the air seemed to thicken around her, invisible pressure pushing outward. One of the attackers fired a red beam streaking toward her chest, but the blast slowed as it approached, bending slightly off course before striking the wall behind her. She released a pulse of force that slammed into two enemies at once, crushing them against the floor with a sound like breaking stone. Even so, Ethan noticed something new. Her movements were not as smooth as before. Her glow flickered faintly between pulses, and she exhaled sharply after each burst of power. Imprisonment had weakened her. The years of containment and experimentation had drained her reserves. "You are not at full strength," he realized aloud. "No," she answered calmly in his mind, "but I am not without strength." An explosion erupted further down the corridor, closer to the reactor sector, and a harsh alien command voice echoed through the station speakers in distorted tones, translated imperfectly by damaged systems. "Secure the royal subject, initiate core destabilization protocol." They were running out of time. Ethan lowered his rifle slightly and made a decision that would have seemed impossible only hours earlier. If we stay here, they will keep coming, he said, glancing at her. We need to reach the reactor before they do. Her eyes studied him carefully for a brief moment, measuring his resolve. You would defend the structure that imprisoned me, she observed. I'm defending the people below it, he replied firmly, and maybe giving your peace a second chance. For the first time, something almost like respect flickered across her expression. They moved together into the damaged corridor, stepping over fallen invaders and twisted metal. Smoke hanging thick in the air. Emergency bulkhead doors half sealed or jammed open. Distant gunfire echoing from upper levels where human soldiers were still fighting desperately. The hallway lights flickered erratically, casting long, shifting shadows along the curved walls. As they advanced, another group of enemy soldiers appeared at the far end, blocking the path to the reactor section. Their weapons already aimed. Ethan ducked behind a shattered wall panel as energy blasts scorched the metal around him, while the Queen stepped into the open again, her glow intensifying. But this time, instead of a wide shockwave, she focused her power differently, her eyes narrowing as the glowing lines across her skin converged toward her hands. She extended one arm, and a narrow beam of concentrated force shot forward, precise and controlled, striking the nearest attacker directly in its chest plate. The armor fractured instantly, the alien collapsing without a sound. Ethan took the opportunity, rising from cover and firing at the flanking unit, hitting it in the joint between armor plates. The creature stumbled, and together they pushed forward step by step, not as guard and prisoner, but as coordinated fighters. They reached a central junction overlooking the lower reactor chamber, and the sight froze Ethan in place. Several of the rival aliens were already inside the reactor control room below, attaching strange devices to the containment pillars, glowing red modules that pulsed ominously. The reactor core itself glowed bright blue at the center of the chamber, energy surging through it in unstable waves. If they activate those devices, your reactor will overload within minutes, the Queen said urgently. Ethan scanned the control panels along the balcony level, searching for manual override access, but most systems were locked or damaged, alarms flashing across every screen. He looked back at her, realizing the truth. He could not stop this alone. You said humans adapt quickly, he said, meeting her gaze, then help me adapt. Below them, one of the rival commanders looked up, sensing their presence, and raised its arm, signaling activation of the sabotage devices. The red modules began pulsing faster, the entire reactor chamber vibrating violently, energy arcs snapping across exposed conduits. In that charged moment, surrounded by chaos and the edge of annihilation, Ethan understood that unlikely alliances are born not from trust, but from necessity, and whatever happened next would decide not only the fate of this base, but the future of two civilizations balanced on the edge of fear and truth. The reactor chamber trembled as the red sabotage devices locked into place around the containment pillars, their glow pulsing faster and faster. Syncing with the unstable rhythm of the core, Ethan felt the heat rising from below, even from the upper balcony. The blue energy at the center of the reactor shifting toward a dangerous white, thin arcs of lightning snapping outward and striking the reinforced walls, showering the room in sparks. The rival alien commander raised its arm again, and a sharp metallic tone echoed across the chamber. The final activation sequence had begun. We do not have much time, the Queen said inside his mind, her voice no longer calm but sharp with urgency. If the overload reaches critical mass, nothing in this sector will survive. Ethan's thoughts raced. He scanned the control consoles around him, most of them damaged, screens cracked, system access denied, flashing repeatedly. He was a soldier, not an engineer. He had basic training on reactor safety, but nothing like this. Below them, the armored invaders spread out in defensive positions around the sabotage devices, guarding them from interference, their weapons trained upward, waiting for movement. The Queen stepped forward to the balcony edge, her glow intensifying again, but Ethan noticed how her shoulders tensed slightly, how the light beneath her skin flickered unevenly. She could release another massive shockwave and clear the room, but it would drain what little strength she had left, and even then the sabotage modules would still need to be removed or disabled. You can destroy them, he said quickly, but that will not stop the overload. We need to redirect the energy. She looked at him, curiosity flashing through her eyes, even in the middle of chaos. You have a plan. Not a full one, he admitted, his heart pounding, but humans are good at turning broken systems into weapons. He moved to a half-functional terminal and forced it open manually, sparks snapping at his gloves as he rerouted auxiliary power to the lower grid. He pulled up the containment schematic, scanning for weak points. The sabotage devices were feeding chaotic energy into the core, destabilizing it. But he noticed something else. The old containment field from Sector 7 was connected to this same reactor grid, designed to draw excess power during spikes. An idea formed in his mind, risky and almost insane. We use your energy, he said, turning to her. You amplify the containment field through the reactor grid. I overload the old barrier system and redirect the surge outward instead of inward. Her expression hardened slightly. If the timing fails, the feedback will consume us both. He nodded once, steady despite the fear in his chest. If we do nothing, it consumes everyone. Below them, one of the rival aliens fired upward, the red beam slicing across the balcony railing and forcing Ethan to duck. Metal melting where the blast struck. More shots followed, forcing them to move. The Queen extended her hand and deflected the next wave with a focused pulse, but she staggered slightly afterward, the effort clearly draining her. You are willing to risk your life for those who imprisoned me, she said quietly inside his mind. I'm not doing it for them, he replied firmly, activating manual override on the old containment system. Alarms screaming in protest as he forced the grid online. I'm doing it because humans don't abandon allies. For a brief second, silence passed between them, even as the chamber roared around them. Then she stepped beside him and placed her glowing hand against the main reactor conduit line running along the balcony wall. The light beneath her skin flared brighter than ever before, white energy spreading across her body like flowing fire. The air pressure in the chamber shifted violently as she began channeling her power directly into the grid. Ethan watched the system readings spike, numbers climbing into dangerous territory, the old containment barrier nodes across the station activating one by one. Drawing in her amplified energy, the sabotage devices below reacting violently to the shift, their red pulses faltering as the core's energy was redirected. The rival commander shrieked in distorted rage and leapt upward toward the balcony with terrifying speed, mechanical limbs gripping the railing as it pulled itself up, weapon arm charging at close range. Ethan reacted instantly, stepping forward and firing directly into the exposed joint beneath its armored plating, the blast forcing it back just long enough. Now, he shouted. The Queen released the full surge. A blinding wave of white-blue energy erupted from the reactor core, racing through the redirected grid and bursting outward through the old containment emitters across the station. The shock wave expanded like a dome, tearing through the invading ships in orbit, ripping apart their hulls in silent flashes of light visible through the fractured observation windows above. Inside the chamber, the remaining rival aliens were thrown violently backward, their armor cracking under the force. The reactor readings dropped sharply from critical to stable within seconds. The sabotage devices below short-circuited and exploded harmlessly against reinforced shielding. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the energy surge faded. Silence fell over the chamber except for the distant groan of damaged metal and the soft hiss of cooling systems struggling back online. Ethan collapsed to one knee, his vision blurred, ears ringing from the blast, smoke drifting lazily through the air. He looked beside him and saw the Queen still standing, though barely, her glow dimmed to a faint shimmer, her breathing slower and heavier than before. The rival commander lay motionless near the balcony edge, its armor cracked and lifeless. Far above them, through the broken upper panels, fragments of destroyed alien ships burned as they fell away from orbit, drifting into the darkness of space. The base was still standing, and for the first time since the attack began, there were no incoming warnings flashing across the screens. Ethan slowly rose to his feet, exhausted but alive, understanding that something had changed forever in that chamber. Not just the outcome of a battle, but the line between enemy and ally, fear and trust. And as he met the Queen's tired gaze and the fading glow of the reactor core, he knew that this night would not end with secrecy again. It would end with a choice that neither humanity nor her people could ignore. Smoke drifted slowly through the broken corridors of the base as emergency crews moved through the damage, sealing ruptured hull sections and dragging injured soldiers toward medical bays. The red glow of warning lights had faded into a softer white as primary systems struggled back online. And outside the fractured observation windows, the remains of the rival fleet burned quietly in orbit like falling stars. Ethan stood near the edge of the reactor chamber balcony, exhaustion heavy in his limbs, dried streaks of ash across his uniform, his rifle hanging loosely at his side, and beside him stood the alien queen, no longer contained, no longer glowing with violent power, but steady and silent. Rescue ships from nearby defense outposts began docking within the hour, reinforcements flooding into the base with weapons ready, expecting to find total destruction or hostile takeover. Instead, they found a scene no one had prepared for: fallen invaders scattered through the corridors, damaged but stable reactor systems, and at the center of it all, a human private standing shoulder to shoulder with the most classified prisoner in Earth's military history. Command officers rushed toward the reactor sector with armed escorts, their expressions shifting from relief to shock the moment they saw her free and unrestrained. Weapons were immediately raised, targeting locks activating with sharp mechanical clicks. "Stand down, Private Cole." One of the senior officers barked, his voice sharp but uncertain. "Step away from the alien subject." Ethan did not move. He felt the Queen's quiet presence beside him, not threatening, not defensive, simply waiting. She had the strength to defend herself again if needed, but she did not raise a hand. She allowed him to speak. "She saved the base," Ethan said clearly, his voice tired but firm, echoing slightly in the damaged chamber. "Without her, the reactor would be gone and half the colony with it." The officers hesitated, exchanging tense glances. One of them activated a wrist display. Reviewing emergency logs, the data did not lie. Energy readings showed a massive redirected surge originating from the old containment grid, a maneuver no human technician could have performed alone in that time frame. "She is still a classified threat," another officer insisted. Though his tone lacked conviction, protocol requires immediate recontainment. Ethan felt something inside him harden, not anger, but certainty. He reached to his belt and activated his personal recorder, projecting a holographic file into the smoky air between them. The final message of Commander Hayes, recorded moments before the command center was destroyed, his face pale and shaken. "She was never the threat." The dying commander's voice echoed softly. "We detained her because we feared losing control of the narrative, not because she attacked us. If anyone survives this, tell them the truth." Silence spread through the chamber, thicker than the smoke still drifting from broken panels. The officers lowered their weapons slowly, shock replacing authority in their expressions. The truth they had enforced for years now stood exposed in front of surviving personnel and fresh reinforcements alike. The Queen stepped forward slightly, not past Ethan, but beside him, her voice entering not only his mind this time, but transmitted through damaged communication speakers across the sector as the base's systems attempted to translate her neural output into sound. "I ended the First War because I saw potential in your species," she said calmly, her translated voice steady and resonant. "I remain alive today because some among you were too afraid to let peace be known, but this human chose differently." All eyes turned toward Ethan, and for a brief, uncomfortable moment, he wished he were still just a rookie assigned to quiet patrol duty. But there was no returning to that life now. Outside, more rescue vessels arrived, their commanders receiving fragments of data from the station, reports of alien attackers destroyed by a combined human and royal energy surge, the narrative spreading faster than any attempt to silence it could manage. Too many soldiers had witnessed the fight, too many systems had recorded the truth. Within hours, Earth High Command opened an emergency transmission channel to the damaged base, their faces appearing across the central holo display. Stern and calculating, they demanded a situation report, but the surviving officers hesitated before responding, no longer certain which version of events to present. Ethan stepped forward again, surprising even himself with the courage in his chest. "The alien queen is not our prisoner," he stated clearly, knowing his words were being transmitted far beyond this chamber. "She is the reason this station still exists." The silence that followed felt heavier than any explosion from the night before. High Command attempted to assert authority, to call for her immediate detention and relocation to a secure, undisclosed facility. But the Queen spoke once more, her glowing markings faint yet steady. "My people will learn of this attack," she said. "They will learn that I was imprisoned, and they will learn that one human stood beside me when annihilation was certain." The weight of those words carried implications too vast to ignore. If she were detained again now, it would not remain a secret. It would ignite the very war humanity had narrowly avoided twice. Hours later, as damaged systems stabilized and injured personnel were transported off station, a temporary diplomatic vessel arrived under neutral signal. Its purpose clear though unspoken, the Queen would not be returned to containment. Not today. Perhaps not ever. Ethan stood at the docking bay as she prepared to board the vessel. The chaos of the night, now replaced by a strange, quiet morning light filtering through fractured observation panels, illuminating the scars of battle across the station walls. "You have altered the course of two civilizations," she said softly in his mind one final time before departure. "Not with power, but with choice." He managed a tired half-smile. "It was my first assignment," he replied quietly. She stepped onto the diplomatic vessel, not as a prisoner escorted in chains, but as a leader departing by decision. And as the airlock sealed and the ship slowly detached from the damaged base, Ethan felt the full weight of what had happened settle over him. His first night at the base had not tested his aim or his obedience. It had tested his judgment. And as rescue crews continued repairing the station and news of the battle spread beyond military control, one truth became impossible to bury again. Humanity's greatest strength was never its weapons. It was the moment one human chose to stand for something greater than fear.